Afghan intelligence has been left baffled by the mystery surrounding the bodies of 10 civilians dug up near a US Army outpost close to Kabul. But there seems little chance those responsible will be found. Afghanistan has now decided to scrap the probe into the murders after Washington refused to cooperate. That's despite the victims being identified as a group of locals detained by a US Special Forces unit operating in the area. However, military officials in Washington have long said their troops have no connection to the killings. And journalist Matthieu Aikins spent 5 months investigating the incident and described his experience in the Rolling Stone magazine. In an interview with RT's Kafanov, he claims the evidence he's seen suggests American involvement there.
This Special Forces team, a Green Beret A team, as they're called, was deployed to an isolated valley west of Kabul where the Taliban and other insurgent groups have a very heavy presence. And what happened was, over last winter, the locals started complaining that the Special Forces team and their translators were murdering people, torturing them, abducting them, and disappearing them. Just extraordinary allegations that at the time were essentially unproven. Now, after the Special Forces team was forced out of the area by the Afghan government, bodies started showing up outside the base, bodies that they said were the bodies of 10 men who had been seen, rounded up by the Americans, and then were not able to be found either by the Red Cross or by the Afghan government afterward. So I essentially investigated these allegations and assembled a huge body of testimony from locals, from officials. I also learned about 2 confidential UN and Red Cross investigations that corroborated the allegations that suggested that the Special Forces and their translators were indeed responsible for these men's fate.
Potential war crime allegations, if they prove to be correct, has there been any accountability for what happened, Matthieu?
Well, the military says that it opened a criminal investigation, so they declined to comment for the story, saying that the criminal investigation is ongoing. But in the 5 months that I spent reporting this story, not a single one of the witnesses that I spoke to had ever been contacted by a U.S. military investigator. So it really does beg the question of whether these investigators are actually going to be able to establish any sort of accountability for what happened there.
Well, certainly disturbing indeed, but this isn't the first time that we've heard of allegations of torture and abuse by Western forces in Afghanistan. And I wonder if you can sort of speak more broadly about this in a wider context.
Well, while the allegations and these incidents are kind of unprecedented in their severity and scale, they do fit part of a larger pattern of recurring abuse of detainees in U.S. and Afghan allied custody, as well as a continued lack of any sort of accountability for individuals who are implicated in these kinds of abuses of detainees. So there's a recurring pattern of abuse and a recurring pattern of a lack of accountability, and this incident really has to be seen in the context of that.
The case is adding to tensions between Washington and Kabul over the security pact that will shape the future role of US troops in the country beyond the May 2014 withdrawal. RT's Gayane Chichakyan explains.
Afghan authorities have repeatedly asked the U.S. to allow them to question the soldiers at the base, but the U.S. repeatedly rebuffed the request. U.S. forces are immune from Afghan law, but not for long. The immunity issue is the very stumbling block on the way to an agreement between the U.S. and Afghanistan, under which some U.S. troops would stay in Afghanistan past 2014, and that's what the Obama administration wants, immunity for the troops so that they can stay beyond 2014. The same agreement that the U.S. wanted with Iraq, but Iraq refused to grant U.S. forces further immunity from justice. Incidents like the killing of civilians in the Wardak Province make it that much more difficult for the Afghan government to justify such an agreement with the U.S. in front of Afghan people.